Good evening, everybody. I'm Jim Olson from Signature Sounds. Welcome to another in our series we call the Backstage Sessions, conversations about music. We have a really special session for you tonight, featuring the great Kris Hillman. And joining Kris, a wonderful musician, radio and TV host named Kris Truelsen. Kris Truelsen is the program director at Radio Bristol in Bristol, Tennessee, and Virginia. It's a radio station that is located inside a museum called the Birthplace of Country Music, because Bristol, Tennessee / Virginia, by the way, the state line runs down Main Street. It's the yellow line down Main Street between the two. So half the town is in Tennessee, half in Virginia. Back in the late 1920s, within the span of a couple of weeks, the Carter family and Jimmie Rodgers were both discovered, kind of known as the Big Bang of country music. It happened in Bristol, Tennessee, and so the birthplace of country music is there. They throw a wonderful music festival every fall called the Bristol Rhythm and Roots Reunion. I had the pleasure of attending in 2019. It was fantastic. Kind of takes over the town for a few days with a bunch of different stages. Really fun stuff. Kris Truelsen hosts a fantastic radio show on Radio Bristol called On the Sunny Side. It's every weekday morning. He also hosts a PBS television program called The Farm and Fun Time. That airs on over 20 million households around the U.S. on PBS. And also, Kris is a musician. He leads a wonderful band called Bill and the Bells, sort of a throwback but cutting-edge string band out of Johnson City, Tennessee. Kris Truelsen tonight will be speaking with the great Kris Hillman. Kris Hillman was born in California in 1944. He first came to prominence as an original member of the Byrds, who changed everything in American music in the mid-60s, first with their amazing run of hits, starting with Mr. Tambourine Man and Turn, Turn, Turn. I, as a 7-year-old boy, I still remember the first time I heard Turn, Turn, Turn on the radio in the back seat of my parents' station wagon. And that sound was so amazing, it just kind of ignited the little inner music nerd in me. Kris was there for all the Byrds hits and also for their big change, which came in 1968 with the release of the album Sweethearts of the Rodeo. Graham Parsons had joined the band, and suddenly the sound morphed into kind of a country rock direction. And it was really the beginning of the whole Americana country rock scene. And Kris and Graham left the Byrds shortly thereafter and formed the Flying Burrito Brothers and put out another seminal album in 1969 called The Gilded Palace of Sin, which featured a bunch of standards, songs that have become standards in our world, like Sin City and Wheels and Devil in Disguise. Those were all songs co-written by Kris Hillman and Graham Parsons. After the Flying Burrito Brothers had their day, Kris went on to join Manassas with Stephen Stills, did a bunch of interesting projects in the 1970s, sort of a restless spirit, doing a lot of different things. And then in the 1980s formed the Desert Rose Band with his pal Herb Peterson and John Jorgensen. And they had a big run of country music hits, some number ones in there. And over the years, Kris has just done so many interesting projects. I love his albums that he did with the Rice Brothers, Tony and Larry Rice, and again with Herb Peterson. His most recent album is called Bidin' My Time, and it was released in 2017, and it was produced by Tom Petty, who, of course, is a huge Byrds fan. A lot of the Byrds sound can be heard all over Tom Petty's recorded work, and he returned the favor in 2017 by producing Kris's Biding My Time album, and it was one of the last projects he worked on before he passed away. Kris Hillman has a wonderful new autobiography just out. It's called Time Between, and it talks about all of this stuff. And so excited to hear this conversation tonight. Please welcome Kris Truelsen and Kris Hillman. Take it away, guys.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate it. Very happy to be here. This is truly an honor to have Mr. Kris Hillman here. This is Kris. Speaking for myself personally, and I think for so many musicians, you've been just a tremendous influence. And I remember, and I think a gateway for a lot of people into country music, and getting folks interested in and sort of blurring the lines of what country music can be and interpreting it in different ways. I think back when I started playing guitar, and I was heavily into rock and roll, and then I found out about the Byrds, and I found out about Sweetheart of the Rodeo, and into the Flying Burrito Brothers, and it completely enthralled me and enraptured me, and took me into a whole different direction than I ever anticipated. And I know just from friends within the industry and stuff, it's such a common theme. So I just want to thank you for that, first of all. And it's really an honor to have you here this evening. I know so I'm in Johnson City right now. I'm in Johnson City, Tennessee. I run a radio station in Bristol. I know you've been through Bristol quite a bit in the past few years. You came through on the Sweetheart of the Rodeo 50th. Mm-hmm. I was out of town, unfortunately, touring, so I didn't get to see it, but I had a bunch of friends there, and it sounded like that was a great time. So I know there's a lot of people who will be watching this in Bristol, and really appreciate you. I want to we've got some time to really dig deep. We've got a good chunk of time to look at your career and talk about the ups and the downs and all the different projects that you've had. I want to first just mention Time Between, the memoir that you just recently put out in 2020.
Kris, I'm sorry, I want to say one thing.
Yeah.
Jim, that was the nicest introduction I've heard in a long time. I just want to compliment Jim on that wonderful introduction. Thank you. And Kris, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
Okay. I agree. It was a beautiful introduction.
Thank you.
Well, tell us a little bit about putting together Time Between. I mean, obviously you've got so many stories and so much history behind your music. Is that something that you've envisioned creating, or was that something that you just that just sort of happened?
As odd as it sounds, it just sort of happened. And I started this, Kris, 7 years ago. And I'm not sure why, other than I thought, well, I'm going to leave something for my kids. And now I've got grandkids since that 7-year period beginning. And I thought I'd clarify a few things. I can't get specific, but there are a couple books written on the Byrds and the Burrito Brothers. I'm going, gee, that wasn't really the way it went down. But I just started writing every day, and I remembered things. And I was very ambitious. I said, well, I'll do 2 volumes, which wasn't going to happen. I mean, 2 volumes, meaning the first one was about growing up in California in the 50s, post-World War II. And the second volume was, of course, going into music. Well, that was overly ambitious, and I did 1 book. But all of a sudden, Kris, I've got a manuscript sitting on a shelf, and I've said to my wife, I think we should look for an agent. Maybe we should get this published. I just wasn't looking that way. And in the interim, I meet Scott Bomar, who was the BMG head of the publishing end of BMG, and he had heard I was writing a memoir, and he said, can I read some of it? And he read a few chapters. He got back to me immediately. He said, I want to talk to you about publishing this book. I love it. We don't need a co-writer, which was the nicest thing I could have heard at that point, that he thought I was a decent enough writer to do this. So off we went. We made a deal. Then I start rewriting the book. I'm getting rid of a lot of excess, adding things. Connie, my wife, was fantastic. She had not read any of it up to this point, but she was, giving me some good editing tips. Like, you have a session here, you're writing about the Burrito Brothers. What was the song you were cutting? And who was on it? That kind of stuff. I said, you're right. I need to. embellish this incident, etc. So yeah, off we went.
Yeah, I will say I've read quite a bit of biographies regarding your career and regarding some of the bands that you've been in, and it was really refreshing to hear it from your voice and because it just gets a little bit deeper. And I think that there's a perspective that you offer that really adds that fills out the story in such an important way. So it's really serving the Americana and country world in a huge way. You mentioned 2 volumes, and one starting out as you in your younger days in as a youth in Southern California. That honestly was one of my favorite parts of the book. Reading about you as a kid, this really kind of idyllic life in the out west, and reading that, it kind of all made sense to me, the trajectory that you went on, because there's a lot of overlap with the idea of just imagery into country music sort of thing. And would you elaborate for our audience a little bit about your upbringing and about just about when you were living in Rancho Santa Fe, right?
Yeah, Kris, I'm at my age, my peer group, I mean, we were growing up post World War II, which was a pretty darn good time to be growing up in America. Here we had just gotten through a horrible World War II, a war, and all the dads came home as pretty young guys, got married, started families. Okay, and that's really what happened. Idyllic growing up, you bet. It was wonderful. It was a different world. We were all taught to be respectful to adults, of course, all of the above. I did have my dad. We had an acre, sort of a funky one-story ranch house. We were living in an area that became one of the most wealthy places in America, Rancho Santa Fe. A lot of celebrities moved there starting in the 50s and have now made it possible to live there. It's so expensive. But when we were there, it was pretty nice. It was middle class. I had my horse. I surfed. I did everything. My horse surfed with me. No, he didn't. But we had a good time. It was great growing up then. It was wonderful. And here's another part of it all. Of course, rock and roll came along in 1955 for me in 56. It was fantastic. Just blew in there, and Chuck Berry, Little Richard, Elvis, of course. And I didn't want to learn the guitar then. It wasn't until later on in 1959, and I got involved in folk music. And that's when rock and roll sort of went to sleep. And Chuck Berry wasn't on the radio anymore. Frankie Avalon was. It had changed. But the country music part of it all, for me, I was watching almost religiously every Saturday night live from LA, which was 160 miles away from us. Spade Cooley, every Saturday night. And Spade Cooley was our Bob Wills. Interesting story with Spade Cooley, but I won't go into that. But anyway, and I was watching Hometown Jamboree with Cliffy Stone, Town Hall Party, Tex Ritter was the host. I mean, this was live stuff. And of course, Cal's Corral, which I ended up working on. And Cal's Corral was like a 3-hour 3-hour live show on Saturday, Sunday afternoon, and Saturday night there was a TV show. I mean, he had that whole thing locked up. But man, anyway, so I'm watching that in high school, and my parents listened to big band music, and my dad, classic, says, "Are you sure this is our son? Did somebody leave him on our doorstep? The family from Oklahoma or something?" He didn't understand why I love that. Unfortunately, the poor guy, he was a wonderful guy, and he didn't live long enough to see the fruits of my labor. Worst cliche of the day. But it was great. I watched all this stuff, and I just had this thing. And then when folk music came along, and I started to learn the guitar, and then when I heard bluegrass, that did it. That absolutely did it for me. And I heard Mike Seeger playing the mandolin first in the New Lost City Ramblers, and then I heard Monroe. And we would go up to the Ash Grove in Los Angeles. I would go up there with a couple of guys I played music with. We saw the Stanley Brothers, Flatt and Scruggs, Doc Watson, unbelievable stuff in the late 50s, early 60s, you know, and I like 10 feet away from them in a club watching Ralph Stanley and Carter Stanley. It was fantastic. So,
and that was at the Ash.
Ash Grove, yeah.
Before we get to some of your early bluegrass days, talk a little bit about how were you introduced to folk music? Through records, right? Or was it through the radio? Like, did the folk boom hit at that point, or was that a few years after?
The folk thing came off of the college campuses, along with jazz, late 50s, early 60s. And as I say, rock and roll had sort of retired in a sense. It got real boring for a year or two prior to the Beatles coming out. So folk music, in my book, I write about my older sister coming back from the University of Colorado, and she has albums under her arm. She has Lead Belly and the Weavers and Pete Seeger and Woody Guthrie. And I loved it. I had listened to the Kingston Trio. I did like Tom Dooley. It was a big hit song on the radio. But that lasted about 20 minutes, the Kingston Trio. I got right into Woody Guthrie and Seeger. And then from there, I hear the New Lost City Ramblers and then bluegrass, and then I was locked in. You know?
When you heard a band like the New Lost City Ramblers, did that music seem foreign to you, or did it make sense? Did it seem like some sort of music that was far off in a distant place that you've never heard or seen, and that you were trying to make sense of, or was it instant where you were like, I get this?
Oh, I got it. And it was string band music. It was pre-bluegrass, we call it. It was string band. But I got it. There was something about it. And you could write a piece on it, an article. But what actually hit that nerve in me? A middle-class kid who surfed. What took me away? But here's a funny story. So all the older guys I hung out with that were surfers, they didn't listen to the Jan and Dean or the Beach Boys. They were listening to Muddy Waters and Flatt and Scruggs. Now go figure.
Wow.
People didn't know that. And so I'm over hanging out with them. I'm 16 years old. These guys are all 20, 21 years old. And they've got these great records. And all of them, when I started learning guitar, they were so supportive, these guys. You know, they took me under their wing. And of course, we'd go out in the water. But the surfing all of a sudden took a back seat. And the music came forefront. Of course, the horse had already gone away. And so the music took a front seat, and I got heavily into it, Kris. And in those days, you learned off records. You didn't have DVDs. You have these wonderful teaching tools now. And there was, oh gosh, what do you call it? I'll get it in a minute. But certain things I would just learn off records. Yeah.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask. Like, it seems in the late 50s, I would imagine at least. I know there was a subculture of folk happening in California, but I would imagine it was probably pretty hard to track down people who were actually doing it and who you could learn like knee to knee from, or you could sit in front of and actually learn, which, fortunately where I live in Tennessee, you can find that no problem. But I would imagine it was probably more difficult for you to actually find people to get that sort of practice.
It was, but then again, Pete Seeger comes through town and he plays San Diego, and I'm in high school, and I go down there with one other guy. There were 3 guys in my high school that really got the folk and bluegrass thing. And I go see Pete Seeger with this guy, a friend of mine, Hideo Chino, Japanese fella. And he played pretty good drop banjo. He was a good banjo player.
Nice.
But we go see Pete Seeger. We go backstage, Mr. Seeger, we're learning. And he was so nice. He says, boys, you keep practicing and you sing right from the heart like you mean it. And it was like watching him on stage when he would get people to sing while we're backstage, and so complimentary and supportive.
Wow.
And you go home going, wow, what a great guy. And then of course you go home and you start practicing. Yeah. I know what the word was. I was looking for tablature. We had tablature, but I had no patience. So if somebody had written tablature out for a Monroe song like Rawhide or something, I'd go, okay, I would get about 80% of it, and then I'd make up the rest. Which actually, when I used to teach beginning mandolin, I would tell people that. I said, you don't copy me, just take what you can, then make up your own part, and you'll get a signature style going. Oh, anyway.
So you picked up the guitar. How old were you when you picked up the guitar?
About 15, 16.
About 15. And then a few years following that, you discovered the mandolin?
Shortly thereafter, about 6 months to a year after. And I kept up on both of them. There was no mandolin teachers around where I live. At least I didn't find any. And that's where I met the fellow who was sitting in with Clarence White and the Kentucky Colonels and in LA at the Ash Grove. And I talked to him, and he lived in Berkeley, California. And I'm in high school. I take the train up, 6 hours on the train with my mandolin to go get a couple of lessons from him.
Wow.
I had a passion for the music. I didn't know anything about it. And the first time I was in a band, the Scottsville Squirrel Barkers, at 18 years old, and we got paid. I didn't believe it, Kris. I said, we get paid to do this? We get $10 each. And I went, wow, this is great. We get paid. We get to play the music we like. And it was wonderful.
The Squirrel Barkers. Let's talk about that band. I love that band name. That record has become a highly collectible record. And it's really good. I haven't heard the whole thing. I've only heard cuts of it. But I remember when I was first learning about you and your music, I always do. I always just go back and try to find the earliest stuff that an artist does. And I found some cuts from that record. It's striking. It strikes me as, I find it striking as to how strong it is. I mean, you said you were 18 years old. It's really tight, and it's got this raw edge to it that early bluegrass musicians had. How did you talk about forming that band? And
I got asked to join. They were already they'd already started together in a sense. 3 of them. Larry, Ed, and 4 of them. But they called me, and I was up in LA at that point in the book where we had to move to Los Angeles because my dad had died. We had no money. And when I turned 18, of course, I got a call from them. They said, can you come to San Diego and play mandolin with us? And that's where I sat my mom down, which I describe in the book. And my mother was a saint. She said, okay, I mean, we were left penniless when my dad died. And I would go to night school for high school credits, and I'd work in the daytime. My mom worked, my sister went to high school. But anyway, she was so great. I said, I want to go to see. She says, go ahead, because I know you're going to be okay. You want to do this, go ahead. I'm only 150 miles away from you if you need anything. And off I went. And the thing about the Squirrel Barkers, that album, we cut it in 4 hours live to 2-track. And Bernie Ledden, who went on to form the Eagles, but he was a Squirrel Barker briefly when Kenny, the banjo player, got drafted, and Bernie filled in on banjo. Bernie was in high school in San Diego, already a good banjo player, great banjo player. But Bernie used to say, when we were young, we played without fear. Now you can relate to that. When you're young, you just go for it, and get a little older and you get called in on a session, you start thinking about it, and instead of, a lot of guys I know, old session players, they said, I want to get it in 1 take, 2 takes, because they don't want to think about it. But the Squirrel Barkers played with passion, and 4 hours. We did the album right to 2-track, was mixed. We go out that afternoon, we do the cover photo. So everything was done in an 8-hour period. Okay, and
wow.
The album, but look at this, is it you can still find it on CD on Ace Records. It's out of England, which is amazing. I don't know how they got hold of it. The vinyl that they put that record on was 2nd grade vinyl. So these albums were made to be sold in a supermarket for 79 cents. I'm serious, 79 cents. Crown Records, Scottsville Squirrel Barks, B.B. King was on Crown Records. Ike and Turner. Oh my gosh. Who is the great blues? Gosh, my brain isn't working yet. It's going to get there, Kris.
Chuck Willis was on there?
What's that?
Chuck Willis?
He was on there, yeah. Oh man, I was thinking of somebody that was really good. Oh my gosh. Okay, T-Bone Walker. Not
nice.
Burnett. T-Bone Walker, the real T-Bone. Anyway, he was on those Crown.
I mean, what a thrill that must have been at 18 to have a record in hand like that.
Well, then
Unbelievable.
why did one do that? Because literally we did that so quickly. We each got a box of 10 records. Well, we did it so we could get more work. So nothing different than today. So we had albums, and we were using those as a demo, and we'd get more gigs around California and stuff. But
yeah,
a lot of fun.
And I mean, bluegrass, of course, is something that that really was stuck with you for the rest up until today.
It was a really small group of people in Southern California that played it. I mean, I remember when I think when Doc Watson came to the Ash Grove, and in the audience was Ry Cooder and David Lindley and Herb Peterson and myself, and just such a small group of people, clique of people that loved not only bluegrass but just traditional music and blues and old timey music. They loved it. So
yeah. Well, let's jump ahead a little bit, and let's talk a little bit about coming from that traditional music and then deciding to sort of go off on a tangent and work with the Byrds, which I think early on, especially, that is such a different sound from what you were doing from when you were 18.
Yeah.
And this is something that I just find remarkable about your career is the how quickly you went from one sound to another sound and made it sound so smooth, and it just makes sense. But at the time, it's like I was looking at these dates and I'm like, this is just like 2 years apart. How in the world does this happen? Talk a little bit about transitioning into what would inevitably be a rock and roll band.
Well, Kris, when the Beatles came out February on Ed Sullivan, I just happened to be back in LA from San Diego, and I visit my mom on Sunday night. Everybody in America watched Ed Sullivan on Sunday night. Everybody. Live, of course, live TV. And there I walk in. I'd heard about the Beatles. I'd never heard them. But I said, what's this band from England? Blah, blah, blah. And they are on. And I go, oh, my God. And I can't begin to tell you. I think anybody my age that saw that show that night that became a musician would understand. They came through that screen at you with so much exuberance and positivity and just great music. Okay, please me. I believe they did. And they did. I Want to Hold Your Hand. I went, oh my God, but there's elements of the Beatles that always were there. They drew so much from country music. Okay. When they did things later on, like I've Just Seen a Face, I Can't Remember, and they were like bluegrass tunes almost. And then they cut Act Naturally, of course, Buck Owens tune. But that was a big part of it. So I had, at that point, shortly thereafter, I had a gig. Squirrel Barkers had stopped because a couple of guys got drafted. I get this gig in LA with a group called the Greengrass Group, which was absolutely dreadful, Kris. I mean, it was the worst music I've ever played. But I got paid $100 a week.
That's good money at the time.
And there was another fellow in the band, Dwayne Story, whose uncle was Carl Story, the old gospel.
Oh yeah.
So Dwayne was a real guy. I mean, there was a guy at the other end of the stage, and I kept looking at him. He'd look at me and we go, "Ay, what are we doing?" But he was.
I've been there.
Family, and he was trying to make some money, and he was good singer, good songwriter. Played the guitar, and I played the mandolin. But anyway, the band wasn't. The Greengrass Group was terrible. So. I get a phone call about a month after the Beatles had been on TV, and this fellow that I'd been working with, Jim Dixon, he had worked with me when I was in a band called, and this is getting off on tangents, the Golden State Boys. Okay, they were on Cal's Corral. You can see this, ladies and gentlemen, in my book. It'll make sense. They were on Cal's Corral. I used to watch that show every Saturday in high school. And there was a bluegrass band on there called the Golden State Boys. Well, I ended up being in the Golden State Boys at 18 years old, right? I met them, and I think we did a bluegrass show with the Squirrel and the Golden State Boys and the Kentucky Colonels and all that. But
and that was with the Gosdens, right?
That was with Vern and Rex Gosden. Let me tell you, boy, did I get a education in singing.
Yeah.
The Gosden brothers. Don Parmalee was the leader, banjo player, great guy. They were wonderful people because they took care of me. They were like 10, 12 years older than me. And we worked some pretty funky places. I had a fake ID, and Vern looked out for me. I will tell you right now, Vern Gosden took care of me. If there was a problem in that bar, he'd put me in the car and lock the door because I was a little skinny kid, you know. So, but I'm jumping ahead because after the Golden State Boys had parted, and I go to work for this Greengrass group, and then I get a call from Jim Dixon, who had worked with us in the studio in the Golden State Boys. He said, do you know these guys, Gene Clark, Roger McGuinn, David Crosby? I said, I know who they are. I don't know them. I know them from the Troubadour, the Hootenanny every Monday night. He says, come on down to the studio we're rehearsing in. Can you come down at 1 a.m? I said, yeah, I'm done working. I go down, I hear them. They were good. I had high standards. I'd been working with the Gosden brothers. But I hear Roger McGuinn, Gene Clark, and David Crosby, one guitar, and they're singing. And it was good. I said, man. So I leave. I go home. I said to Jim, these guys are really good. I don't know what you're going to do, but they're probably going to do something really good. I go home, go back to my horrible gig. I get another phone call 2 weeks later. It's Jim Dixon. Can you play the bass? I said, I could handle it. Yeah, I can handle that. Because David Crosby was going to be the bass player in this thing, and he doesn't want to do it. He's not comfortable. So, you want to come down and see how it works? I said, okay. So immediately I find a bass, $50 bass, Japanese bass, terrible. I don't even know.
You didn't know how to play the bass.
No, I never held an electric bass. I'd messed around on a stand-up bass.
It's a pretty ballsy move.
So I knew something was going to happen with them, and I'm in this horrid group. I had to get out of that group eventually. But I go down. I meet them.
You keep saying it. I want to just like, what made that group so bad?
The Greengrass group. Well, because the songs we were doing were written by Randy Sparks, and he was the one that started the Christie Minstrels. So I believe I mentioned this song in the book. Billy's mule can tote a wagon, he can pull a plow. That kind of stuff. It's right there on the front porch of the Beverly Hillbillies. If you follow.
I got you.
Goofy.
I got you.
It
very different from the Gosden brothers, that's for sure.
It integrates country music. It paints country music. It was painting country music in a bad light. That's what bothered me. Okay,
gotcha.
I go down into the studio and meet Gene, Roger, and David, and I plug in my bass. There was one amp in that studio, old Epiphone amp. Roger was plugged into it. McGuinn, I plug into it. Mike Clark, the drummer, had cardboard boxes, a cymbal and snare. But we started playing, and it got to a point where it was starting to sound pretty good. We had some songs, and it just went from there. But the thing is, we all came out of folk music, and I'm saying me too in bluegrass, but we weren't a rock band. We were never a rock band when we started. We weren't a garage rock band. We didn't have a blueprint. We didn't know what we were doing. We plugged in and went from there. And McGuinn was, as I always say, was the most seasoned musician, had been an accompanist to Bobby Darin and to Chad Mitchell Trio and the Limelighters. He was a good player then. And we developed a sound, and it was, my contribution was always sort of leaning toward country and bluegrass. That's what I would bring into the mix,
What I find so interesting, the Byrds, it's reading time between, it's just like the trajectory for success with the Byrds happened so quickly.
Yeah, it did.
It seems to me like was there a different sort of scope when you joined that band that was for this idea of like national success, where it's like, okay, we need to do this and this to get to this level? Or did it just sort of like fall to place? Did you have a team that was helping you do that? Because it just seems seems unbelievable.
Well, it was quick. Gene Clark was a very prolific songwriter. So the couple songs that we already started doing in the beginning were some that Gene had written. They were very Beatlesque. Okay, we were emulating the Beatles, and we probably saw, as a band, we went and saw A Hard Day's Night at the movie theater 10 times, studied it. But then we got this wonderful gift from Bob Dylan, Mr. Tambourine Man. Okay, and it worked out really well. As far as somebody guiding us, the one thing we did get from our manager, who was Jim Dixon, who got me that gig in the Byrds as the bass player. Told us at one point when we were starting out, he said, "You guys need to go for more depth in substance in your music. Don't go for that quick hit, boy, girl, love triangle hit song. Make a record you're going to be proud of in 40 years. It was great advice. Fantastic. So when he brought Tambourine Man to us, Bob Dylan had written that in a straight 2/4 time. It sounded like a country song. You know, it wasn't in where we took it.
Was Dylan already was he a huge name at that point?
Oh, huge, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
We didn't like it. Dixon brings us the song, beautiful lyrics, and we go, I don't like it. Well, in those days on AM radio, maybe you got 2 minutes, 30 seconds on a single. FM rock was not happening yet. It was a few years away. So we could only do one verse. We didn't like the song, but McGuinn, to his credit, went home with it and messed around with it, and he comes back and he puts it in 4/4 time. And it becomes danceable. And that was great because when Dylan heard us do it, he loved it. He said, my God, you can dance to this. He just blew him away. And that's what made it. And we do one verse, take me for a trip on your magic swirling ship. And we did use Columbia Records signed us to a singles deal. We used the Wrecking Crew. And I understand why, because the Columbia's hedging their bets. They're going, okay, we got one single, we're going to play it. Let's make this the best we can. And that's it's a very slick record. I always thought we could have handled it, but it's okay. It got us in the door. We had a huge hit record, #1 record in America and all over Europe, Australia, everything. Great, just knocked us out in the ballpark. And off we went. It was fantastic.
Can set the stage a little bit. What of sort of the LA scene at this point. I mean, you guys are becoming one of the bands at the forefront of really sparking an entire scene and movement in a sense. What was LA and Laurel Canyon and surrounding area? What was that like around that time? Was it a competitive place to be, or was it sort of a place where everybody was kind of lifting each other?
Oh, I don't think it was competitive. It was such a creative time. We got in there at a very good time. And of course, we held court at this club, Ciro's, which was on the Sunset Strip. Ciro's was a big nightclub in the 40s and 50s. And when television came along and got popular, the nightclubs started to really be hurting. They were closing down. And unless they started to adapt, well, Ciro's adapted by hiring a rock band, as did the Whiskey A Go-Go, which opened later, and Kazari's, and they had rock bands in there. So then they started doing business. But we held court at Ciro's. We did great business there. And originally they had us in for a weekend. They held us over, and it was really wonderful. And Ciro's, as I explained in the book, Little Richard's band came in right after we had done a 1-week stint. And we had these stupid suits that our manager thought we should get. And we didn't wear them that night. We put them in the dressing room. And then we finished our week gig at Ciro's, and Little Richard's band came in. And they loved the suits and took them. That was great. We were so happy. But that's where
Did they ask for them?
No. They were, look at this. Anyway, so Jimi Hendrix was his guitar player. And I never forget, I'm in there watching Little Richard with Mike Clark, the drummer in the Byrds. And I said, who's that guy on the end? Jimi Hendrix, with a suit on, band suit, playing, not jumping around, not setting it on fire, nothing. Playing unbelievable, like backup band Stratocaster stuff. Wow. And Little Richard, and I went, who is that guy? And we talked to him. He's really a great guy. He was really nice. And we said, we were in this band, the Byrds, about myself. So we didn't run into him for another year. We saw him in England again. He remembered seeing us, and he had just started to take off then. Of course, we worked with him at Monterey at the Pop Festival there too. It was an exciting time. So LA, in a sense, was it was really just bustling. And then, of course, a lot of other bands came along. The Love and Spoonful came out from New York. The Buffalo Springfield came along, and all within a couple of years after 1965, about 66, 67, those bands came along.
Nice. You just mentioned your UK tour. Was that your first UK tour when you went over? And it sounded like that was a really rough initial tour, kind of a learning experience for you guys.
That was a in hindsight, being the genius that I am in hindsight, I would have taken us the band over waited another 6 months, 8 months. We went over too soon, but I think it was Derek. We had Derek Taylor as our publicist, and he had worked for Brian Epstein. He had worked for the Beatles, and I think he wanted to sort of march back, triumphantly with the Byrds. And it was okay, but it was hard. It was hard on us. We had been working in the States, and we immediately get on a plane for London, and it was tough, but we made it. Mm-hmm. And it didn't kill us. It didn't stop the career. And we went back a lot after that. We went to the UK a lot. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about developing your songwriting. It sounds like initially that wasn't something you were focusing on when you were in the bluegrass bands and such. And then early on in the Byrds, you started writing some tunes, which of course then would cross over into Flying Burrito Brothers and into the rest of your career. Did you always want to be a songwriter, or was that something that you just started doing, or like what was how did you fall into becoming a songwriter?
I just sort of grew into it. But the funny thing is, on the Squirrel Barkers, I did write a song, an instrumental.
Oh, really?
Three finger breakdown. It was just a bluegrass 101. It was just a bluegrass instrumental, up tempo. But I had somebody very interesting write out the sheet music for me. Mason Williams. You remember who Mason Williams was? He did classical jazz. Okay, he was he wrote for the Smothers Brothers show. He had a huge hit called Classical Jazz, instrumental. But Mason was in the Navy in San Diego, and I remember him in his khakis. Navy khakis, and writing out the music, very good musician, of Three Finger Breakdown. So there it is. It meant nothing. It was just the first song I wrote. I grew into that. I was very shy in the beginning time of the Byrds, because in bluegrass, you weren't really a showman per se in the old days. You just sort of got up and played. You had enough to think about. You had to sing and you had to play spot on. And so when the Byrds came along, I mean, it was a different ball game. You really had to be an entertainer, and I had to learn. I was shy as all get out. I'd be in the back playing the bass, and I grew into that. I grew into getting more confidence, to singing, to learning how to sing, and to writing songs and learning how to write songs. But it was a good process. The first song I wrote was Time Between. Okay. And I brought Clarence White in to play. He had just transitioned over to playing Telecaster from playing acoustic guitar. Monster guitar player. One of the finest acoustic flat pickers I've ever heard. And he, Tony Rice Clarence was his mentor.
Right.
And he took Tony under his wing and taught him how to play guitar. But Clarence came in and played Telecaster on Time Between. To this day, I've had discussions. Dwight Yoakam spent an hour on the phone with me discussing the solo that Clarence took on Time Between. It was that good. And it was straight out of the amp, Kris. It was just out of a twin, no gadgets, and his Telecaster. And then later he had the pull string and all that stuff that he used, that pulled on the B string.
Right. Oh, the B bender.
Yeah, but I had met Clarence when I was 16. We were both 16 years old. And eventually I got him in the Byrds. But that was the first song I wrote, Time Between. And Vern Gosdin sang the harmony.
Really?
Yeah.
Nice.
Love and trust, it's good. And it was great. And then David comes in, Crosby says, hey, listen, I'm the singer in this band. So he put the harmony on, which was fine. He did it good. Of course, he's a good singer too. But then I just had a moment this whole week where I was writing songs, and eventually I ended up I ended up writing So You Want to Be a Rock and Roll Star, and that's when I called Roger McGuinn up. I say, listen, I got something that I need you to listen to this. He comes over and I play it, and he says, cool, this is great. And he put the bridge onto it on Rock and Roll Star. And he knew this. See, I was influenced by Hugh Masekela, having done a session for him. It's in the book. And I had played on a jazz session, go figure, me on the bass. I don't know why they hired me, but it was fun, and they liked what I was doing, and I was so excited when I came home. I started writing songs, but one of those songs was Rock and Roll Star, and it was totally influenced by Hugh. Oh, da dum, dun, 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 dun. And I had one of his guys play on it, Cecil Bernard. These were all South African musicians, way before Paul Simon did his Graceland album. And they were such great people. And Crosby played on that session. I played on it. And the rest of these people were from South Africa. And the lady that we performed for was Letta Mbulu, okay, Swahili woman. And loved her. She just said, "Kris, you are cooking." When she told me about my bass guitar, I said, "Me, really?" And but I go home, Kris, I start writing. It turned a switch on in my head, right? And off I went.
Well, and it's something, I mean, that you have written some really amazing songs through the years. I want to try to get in some Sweetheart and further into your career, into the Desert Rose Band and such. Can you talk about the introduction of Graham into the Byrds? That was a very short-lived project, really. The Sweetheart, it's pretty amazing reading your book and seeing the significance that Sweetheart of the Rodeo has eventually had upon the global music. But it sounds like really when you were putting it together, it took a while for you to appreciate that, I think, or to understand the influence that it eventually would have. Can you talk about meeting Graham and getting him into the Byrds? And you guys had an interesting relationship, it sounds like, where there were a lot of ups and a lot of downs. And
yeah, I had once again heard about him. Someone had said there's a band, International Submarine Band. Mm-hmm. Young man, this guy, Graham Parsons, really. But I met him, and as I describe in the book, and it's an old story, but it's a good story. I met him in a bank in Beverly Hills, and his band had fallen apart. McGuinn and I were basically putting the Byrds back together. It was just the two of us at that point. We had finished an album called Notorious Byrd Brothers. Just the two.
Which I love. I love that record.
Oh, thank you. I do too. I liked it. But the two of us finished that record. We used some, session players, and came out pretty well. And then here we are. I said, we start having to look for people to hire in the band. And I meet Graham in the bank, and I said, "Do you want to come down to our rehearsal tonight?" I said, "We're sort of looking for a keyboard player." And he said, "I can play keyboards." I said, "Okay." So he comes down. He was okay on the keyboard, so he's a better rhythm guitar player, really. He's a better acoustic rhythm player. But immediately, at the end of the rehearsal, we liked him. He's like, Graham was a very lovely man. He was engaging and very, very charming man. And we liked him a lot. And then at the end of the rehearsal, he starts singing, "You've got me under your..." I said, "Yes, sir." And I went over and sang harmony with him. I went, "Okay, now, you like Buck Owens?" "Oh, yeah." So I said, "Well, you're in, buddy." So we hired him. But he knew the music, and Roger was okay with it. He wasn't a big country fan, but Roger was good with it. And, we worked together. Graham was only with us for 6 months, and he was just an employee at that point. But he was very instrumental, no pun intended, please help me, in getting us to go to Nashville. Okay, let's go to Nashville. We go, okay. Well, we weren't going to cross over. We weren't going to go, well, let's be a country band now. We were just the Byrds making a country album, and we're going to stay the Byrds. And off we went to Nashville, to the Columbia Studios down there, and it was great. I mean, we had Junior Husky, Sr., playing bass. John Hartford was all over that album. He was so good on banjo and fiddle. Lloyd Green, unbelievable, playing steel. And Lloyd told me, he said, most of the time when we get called for sessions, they say, you play here and you play here. And I go into your session the first day, and I said, where do you want me to play? And he says, you said, Kris, you said anywhere you want. He said, I couldn't believe it. He said, I was in heaven. I could do whatever I wanted. And I said, of course he did the right thing. But so we did it down there. Then we got a guest shot on the Opry in 1968, excuse me. Then Kris was only radio broadcast on Saturday night. There was no television or anything. And we were on the Tom, Paul, and the Glacier Brothers portion. And it's in the book, and where we were supposed to do 2 songs, which we did. We did You Ain't Going Nowhere, which we had cut, a Bob Dylan song. And they wanted us to do Sing Me Back Home, which was a huge hit for Merle Haggard at that point in time. And Graham, Tom Paul comes up after the first time. Fellas, that was great. Fantastic. You're going to do Sing Me Back Home now, aren't you? And Graham says, no, actually, we're going to do Hickory Wind. Well, unbeknownst to Roger and I were going, what? So Parsons was an ambitious boy. He jumped on that microphone and took over. And at the time, I said, well, that was interesting. And then I think Tom Paul got really upset. How dare you do that to me on mic after this thing? And Skeeter Davis was there. She was very sweet to us. She says, you birds, don't you worry. People just aren't used to having a group like you on the Opry. You couldn't have a drum set. You could have a snare.
Yeah.
You couldn't take a full drum set. But it was
did you take offense? Did you and Roger take offense to that? Or
I did afterwards. Kris, after about 6 months, a year later, after Graham we had parted company, I said, that was really disrespectful. We don't do that. And McGuinn knew. He's a pro. He gets it. I said, that was so disrespectful. Why did we let that happen? And Roger said, I think it was already, we couldn't have stopped it. He was already into doing it. So there were moments, and I'm just going to wind this up with, I did love Graham. He was he was a great to write with. He had a great sense of humor, and he had a great work ethic for a while in the first Burrito Brothers album. And then I lost him. I lost him to the excesses of this business, and that was too bad. I really lost him. And we parted. I had to fire him. We parted company, and he ends up living with Keith Richards for almost a year. And I didn't see him until he came back to the States, and I had kept the Burritos together and turned the Burritos into a darn good live band. And he came over. I was working, I think, Maryland or someplace, and he hooks up with me, finds me, and sat in with me. It was great. We sang together. It was fun. It was about 1970. He's back from England, and he says, I want to go back to LA and make a record. I'm trying to find a girl singer. Well, I had already met Emmy Lou. This is all in the books. I'm jumping ahead, folks. I'd met Emmy Lou in Georgetown, Washington, D.C., and she sat in with the Burritos. She sang It Wasn't God Who Made Honky Tonk Angel. She did a good job on it. But she wasn't even into country music herself at the time. She was doing folk music. But I sat Parsons down and said, man, there's a gal in Washington, D.C. you've got to talk to. And he said, okay. So it took me an hour to get him to call her, to talk him into calling Emmy. Finally he calls her. He says, well, she said, why don't you come down to D.C. or come up to D.C. and let's talk about it. And he says, can you pick me up at the train station? She says, no, I don't know you. I'm not going to pick you up. So it was just a funny line. And he goes there and they talk, and he has her come to LA and they make a couple records. So that was it.
Unreal.
But he really opened the door for her, and he taught her a lot of stuff, mostly the Louvin Brothers and things. Graham, the one thing I loved about him was he could take an R&B song. Us cutting Do Right Woman in itself was so strange, but we made it work. We made it come from a man's angle. And Dark End of the Street, those kind of songs. And I love that, and we did that. So we had a good time the first year.
Did you feel like when you were cutting songs like that have that sort of crossover R&B tinge, and did it feel groundbreaking at the time? Because I mean, now those are regarded as such groundbreaking records, both Sweetheart, the Gilded Palace of Sin, and they've just made such an impact on people. Did you feel like that was happening while you were creating it?
Well, we were having a great time. I'll put it that way. It's not ever a question where you're in the middle of making the record. Go, this is the greatest thing in the world. I might as well order my Grammy now. But you know what I'm saying? You're following your heart. And the Burrito thing was fun. And one of the best things, Dylan had done an interview for Rolling Stone, a big one, and he mentions the Burrito Brothers. He mentions me. So I love Kris. He's a great musician. I love that little hippie boy on that album. I love the Burrito Brothers. He said, Dylan says, the Brothers had made a great album, and that little hippie boy was funny as all get out, whatever he said. So that album, it held its ground. It really did, and as did Sweetheart. Sweetheart at the time, I thought it was pretty good, but it wasn't it was a noble experiment. I'll tell you another quick story, and within 2 or 3 years, it's looked upon as the greatest thing in the world, Sweetheart of the Rodeo, which what it did was, Kris, it opened the floodgates for country rock on the West Coast. I did an interview with Dwight Yoakam and Merle Haggard at the Country Music Hall of Fame. And Merle was so darn funny. He goes, and talking about Sweetheart. He says, well, he looks at me, he says, close, but no cigar. It was close, but not wasn't quite there. I said, you know what, Merle? I said, I couldn't argue, I couldn't agree with you more. I said, and I'm not just saying that. I said, I thought it was almost there, but we could have delved into it a little heavier, whatever. It was just a funny line. So.
But I think that's one of those things about that record that's so appealing to people who might not be country music aficionados or country music lovers. It's this idea of introducing those sounds to people that I think it resonates so strongly. It did with me. It turned me on to. It's the reason I listened to Jimmy Rogers, for real. Yeah. It made me look back and go look at honky tonk music and then keep going. And I think that I really think that is true for many, many people. One thing I want to ask you, I hate that we're sort of running low on time because we could just keep going for hours here. One thing I find really remarkable about your career is the fact that you were able to maintain relationships with folks that you were in bands with that maybe at points had falling out with, or bands split up. But reading through your book, I just find it amazing that you were able to rekindle friendships and to maintain relationships with people that it's an industry that can be so hard for so many different reasons. Has that always been a priority for you to do that?
I think I was sometimes in the role of peacekeeper. I was almost physically holding the maniacs at bay. But I didn't hold any animosity towards anybody I worked with, living or dead. I don't hold any animosity towards anybody, and I purposely did not denigrate anybody in this book. I didn't see I didn't think it was relevant for me to say, well, I found Graham, but he was passed out on something and had been taking so-and-so. I didn't think that was relevant. I'd rather talk about his contributions as a singer-songwriter. Like I say, I've kept up relationships with everybody, living or dead. I hold no animosity, and I have some wonderful friends out there. Wonderful. Crosby, I love dearly, and Roger, and everybody I've worked with. I was very blessed into what I got to do. I never was looking to be Bruce Springsteen. I wasn't good enough at the time. I couldn't be Bruce Springsteen. I was a musician, Kris, and I liked playing in bands. One of the last interviews Tom Petty did, he says, I don't think Kris liked show business that much. He was a real musician. And I loved that. I said, boy, did he get that right? I didn't care if I was in a limousine. That meant nothing to me. And I liked playing music. I liked interacting and working in combos and quartets and all the above. And then to the point of Desert Rose, where I was running the show, that was great. Mm-hmm. That was the longest, by the way, 8 years in that band.
8 years.
Yeah, lots of success on the charts, and it was a great band. The musicians were good, the singing was good. We were on it. We were on the game. Yeah. And the best part about Desert Rose is when we did say, "Hey, it's time to say goodbye. Let's put it to sleep for a while." We all kept working together in other entities. I still work with John Jorgensen and Herb Peterson quite a bit. We did do one last show together as Desert Rose at this Norwegian festival about 5-6 years ago. But we remained really, really close friends, which is a good thing. And I say that for every other band I was in too. A lot of them are gone. A lot of them have passed on. But
one thing, since you've been in the industry for such a long time, how, for up and coming musicians who might be watching this, how have you seen the industry change? And does it seem, is there still a lot of similarities to how you see the industry functioning as it did way back when, or does it just seem like a different beast nowadays?
Oh, it's definitely different. When I started out, it was the record business. It was a cottage industry. It was a small cottage industry. You had to really have a semblance of being able to play and sing to even get in the door of a studio or a record deal. Things have changed. The industry has certainly changed, the record industry. That doesn't mean it's not over. I see a lot of the young artists, the young bands reinventing themselves, adapting to it. It's still bottom line, Kris, that you have got to have something to offer an audience, right? You have to build up a fan base and present something that people really can gravitate to and love. And the rest of it sort of just will work itself out as far as making a CD, selling it on your website, Amazon, going on. When we can all work again, you sell them at your gigs, etc. So, but in the olden days, it was easier. And I would have kids come up to me. It hasn't happened for a while, but Mr. Hillman, do you have any advice for me? My band, 18, 19-year-old kid. I said, yeah, get a 4-year college education. Their mouth drops open. What? I said, I didn't say to quit music. Play music. Have a great time. Continue to I love dogs. It's okay. Continue to develop your craft of singing and songwriting. But get a 4-year degree in something you like, whether it's music or whether it's anything. That's something you really like to do. Don't say I'm going to college to get a degree and make a lot of money because you'll be miserable in your whole life. So that's what I would tell these kids. And I meant it because it's not the same thing it was when I started. It was a very young business and you had a better shot at it, right? And the other good thing, Kris, was if you were lucky enough to get a record deal, they'd keep you for a while.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't like, he didn't go platinum on the first album release, so let's drop him. They should keep you for a few albums and develop you. That was a good thing. Anyway.
I want to apologize. Ruby's in the background. I think our postman's about to go by. My hound dog doesn't like the postman. Well, that's great advice. And I would like to close with you've consistently put out amazing records. I mean, Biding My Time is such a great record.
Thank you.
And are anything in the works for the future? Are you still motivated to do projects or taking some time? I mean, I know you've been on tour with the Sweetheart tour.
Well, I will probably look at that. I mean, I am. And Tom, one of the last things Tom Petty said to me when I was thanking him profusely, thank you for doing this. I really had such a great time, and we made a really good record. I'm really happy with this. Thank you. It's the greatest way to end the recording part of my life. He went, what are you talking about? I'm not done with you. I said, what? He says, no, I want to make an electric country album and a rock album. I said, really? He said, oh yeah, we're not done. I love that. And he was such a sweet guy. And I'm going, I was so amazed that he had said that. But then when he passed, I was down in Nashville. I was just heartbroken when that day he died. It was terrible. Anyway, he left an unbelievable footprint for all of us. What a musician, what a singer, and what a body of songs. Talk about songwriting. What a body of work he left us all. But yeah.
Well, leaving an impact and a footprint of inspiration. I think everybody who's watching this knows clearly how amazing your career has been and how much it's shaped so many musicians through the years. This has been a tremendous honor for me, Kris. I want to thank you, and I truly love your work, and thanks for just being such a great interview. This has been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah.
I want to let people know that your book, Time Between, you got to go check it out. I flew through it. I read it in 2 days. It was one of the best reads I've had.
Thank you.
So go and check that out. Time Between: My Life as a Bird, Burrito Brother, and Beyond. Kris Hillman.
And Kris, you can get it on my website, krishillman.com, and there's signed ones, blah, blah, blah. But I wanted to tell you something. It takes a good interviewer to get a good interviewee, meaning a good interviewer is going to get someone to talk, and I talk a lot. If someone propels me, and you ran a wonderful interview, so that's why I talk too much, because you pulled it out of me. That was great.
Well, thank you, Kris, and a big thanks to Jim and Lynn at Signature Sound for putting on this wonderful music series. We want to thank everybody for tuning in this evening, and make sure to check out some of the other great programming that Signature Sounds is putting together throughout this odd time when we're all stuck at home. Wish you well, Kris. Thanks so much for hanging out. I can't wait to see you in Bristol again at some point.
We will be there. I know I'm going to be working again. We are all going to be working, Kris. It's going to resolve itself. Everything is going to get back to something normal.
Yes, sir. Well, thank you.
Thank you very much. And I must say, I've been a very blessed guy. Okay? That's what my career is about. God has blessed me very much. Thank you so much.